A question by Brian. Hey, love your Japanese learning videos. I've never heard you talk about the monolingual transition, and in your January video, I believe that you still used English definitions. Wouldn't you easily be able to read fully Japanese definitions at this point? Or are there any upsides when it comes to sticking to English? This is a question that I've received so many times, and I'm finally going to answer it in this video. So, for those of you who don't know, the monolingual transition essentially means transitioning to learning your target language entirely by using said target language, which in practicality means that you're going to be using a fully Japanese dictionary for lookups instead of a Japanese to English one, for example. And this concept is really prevalent in certain Japanese learning communities, and the main argument for it is that if you use a bilingual dictionary, like a Japanese to English one, you're going to make false associations between the two languages. And yeah, that's actually true. It has even happened to me in the past, but despite this, I still use both English definitions as well as Japanese ones, but primarily English ones. And even though I probably am fluent enough to only use monolingual definitions, the reason I haven't done a monolingual transition is simply because for myself personally, I find that the benefits outweigh the negatives. So while I do agree that using a Japanese to English dictionary might give you false associations, the thing is that when you learn new words from Immersion, you derive the meaning of said word not just from the dictionary, but also the context that you found that word in. And that word to context association gets refined over time as you see the same word again and again in various different contexts, and naturally, those context associations are slowly going to override the dictionary definition that you used as a crutch in the beginning. After all, dictionary definitions, even in your native language, are merely guides that help you understand a word's basic meaning. In other words, words are more than words if you'll take my word for it. In fact, you can learn a new language without ever using a dictionary, and I know that this is true because most of the words I know in English, I never looked up. I learned them purely from context. I was a kid watching YouTube videos and playing video games. I'm not going to bother pulling up a dictionary when CJ says,
"Oh shit, here we go again."
And as for the English words that I learned from Estonian textbooks with usually one-to-one mappings, well, I don't think I have any issues with communicating or understanding English because of having done so. So in reality, when I immerse and do lookups, an English definition that I might see during a lookup is just going to be a small, vague hint. The true definition lies in the context, and you're going to refine your intuitive understanding of a word over time as you encounter it in different kinds of scenarios. Now, some of you might say that even if you find those words during immersion, the English definitions might still mislead you with false associations. And once again, I agree, it absolutely still can. But since I can do lookups and Anki reviews so incredibly quickly when using English definitions, I accept the risk, especially because those definitions most of the time are good enough, and further immersion is going to iron out those deficiencies over time anyway. And let's be real for a moment, are you really so confident in your Japanese ability that you're going to say that you understand every single word perfectly in every Japanese definition to the extent that you're not going to have any vagueness or misunderstandings when it comes to what the word means according to said Japanese definition? If you are, then you're most likely native or so fluent that you don't need to concern yourself over such small details anymore. The point is that even if you use monolingual definitions, you can still have misunderstandings. Maybe not as often, unless you're not that advanced in Japanese, in which case, maybe even more often. But like I said, I do use Japanese definitions as well. For example, whenever I feel like I want further explanation during a lookup, it's just that I don't feel like I need to use Japanese definitions exclusively and purposely refrain myself from using English ones. Especially because, like I already mentioned, regardless of the dictionary, for many words, the true definition is something that can only be learned through seeing that word over and over again in various different contexts. So my take is that as long as you do a lot of immersion, which you're going to be doing anyway, you're going to be fine regardless of whether or not you've made the monolingual transition. You're not going to be ruined forever because you read an English definition. Over time, your brain will automatically override it with the associations you made from seeing it in context instead, and that goes for monolingual definitions as well. In fact, now when I do my Anki reviews, more often than not, I don't even look at the definition anymore. I just look at the kanji, the reading, which combined with being reminded of the context that I mined that word from, is already going to be enough. So when it comes to the monolingual transition, I personally think that it's unnecessary. you can become fluent either way. It's not something like pitch accent where you cannot deny its existence or importance because it's an actual part of the language. I'd even go as far as to call the monolingual transition overrated because I've seen so many beginners feeling pressured to do the monolingual transition at a stage where they can barely even immerse. But it's unsurprising considering that it's often preached in a dogmatic manner with a lack of nuance and with a slight hint of fear-mongering. I'm not saying that it doesn't have value. If you want to do it, more power to you. Just keep in mind that you don't have to rush it. It's never going to be too late. But sometimes it might be too early, because if you find that the monolingual transition has made learning Japanese feel more frustrating, less enjoyable, and harder to stay consistent with, well, just know that you don't have to limit yourself to only Japanese definitions. You can always use both. You're going to be fine. And when you think about it, the monolingual transition, in some ways, is inherently paradoxical. Because if bilingual definitions are such a big problem, by the time you get good enough to exclusively use Japanese definitions, almost all the words you know in Japanese should already be poisoned, which also means that the Japanese definitions should also become inherently inaccurate. Yet, you quickly find out that that isn't an actual problem. So, even though in the beginning I said that bilingual definitions can indeed lead to false associations, it's really not as big of a deal as you might think it is for all the reasons that I explained in this video, and anecdotally, I can also vouch for that from my personal experience. So, I'm confident that you're going to reach fluency either way, as long as you stay consistent and get enough input, which you need to do anyway.